I am Nia, 32 years old, and for a decade, I kept a massive aviation empire from crashing into the ground. But when the founder suffered a stroke, his entitled son walked into the glass boardroom and handed my entire life's work over to his 28-year-old Instagram model girlfriend. When she smiled and called me just a hired hand, I did not scream or cry. I simply walked away knowing that without my name on the federal licenses, their entire luxury fleet was about to become a collection of very expensive paperweights. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to watch an arrogant person destroy their own life because they underestimated your worth. Growing up, I was taught that hard work and fierce loyalty were the ultimate currencies. I applied that philosophy to every aspect of my life, especially my career. For 10 years, I served as the Chief Operating Officer of Vanguard Aviation, the premier private charter fleet catering to the black elite of Atlanta. We flew politicians, professional athletes, and top-tier executives. It was a high-stakes, high-stress environment, and I thrived in it. I was the absolute pulse of that company, managing every flight route, every pilot schedule, and every complex legal compliance standard required to keep us in the air. 2 months ago, the founder of the company, a brilliant but incredibly stubborn man named Desmond, suffered a massive stroke. The financial fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Creditors panicked, high-profile clients threatened to pull their lucrative accounts, and the board of directors was ready to jump ship. I stayed awake for 48 hours straight, locked in my office, with lukewarm coffee and a mountain of legal documents. I aggressively renegotiated our aircraft leases, secured emergency bridge loans, and single-handedly kept Vanguard Aviation from filing for bankruptcy. While I was fighting tooth and nail to save his family's legacy, Desmond's son Marcus was busy posting photos of luxury sports cars from a lavish vacation in Dubai. Marcus was 34, dangerously arrogant, and had never worked a real day in his life. He wore custom-tailored suits, paid for by his father's sweat, and carried himself with the unearned confidence of a man who believed the world owed him absolute submission. The moment Desmond was stabilized but completely incapacitated in his hospital bed, Marcus flew back to Atlanta and stepped into the CEO role like it was a royal birthright. He strutted into the corporate headquarters, acting like a king returning to his castle. And he did not come alone. He brought his new girlfriend Chloe along for the ride. Chloe was a 28-year-old social media influencer whose greatest accomplishment was securing brand deals for Detox Tea. She had zero corporate experience, let alone any understanding of the highly regulated aviation industry. But she had a massive following and a particular talent for spending Marcus's trust fund. It happened on a Tuesday morning. I was in the middle of reviewing our highly sensitive quarterly compliance reports for the Federal Aviation Administration when Marcus's assistant summoned me to the main glass boardroom. The room was suspended over our primary hangar, offering a sweeping view of the luxury jets I had fought so hard to keep. I walked in with a thick stack of finalized fuel hedging contracts in my arms, expecting to brief him on our stabilized cash flow. Instead, I found Marcus sitting arrogantly in his father's oversized leather chair, his feet resting casually on the polished mahogany table. Chloe was perched right on the edge of the desk next to him, admiring her freshly manicured nails while wearing a designer outfit that cost more than our junior pilots made in an entire month. "Nia, we are making some necessary structural changes today," Marcus began. He leaned back, lacing his fingers together, with a smug, self-satisfied smile that instantly set my teeth on edge. The aviation industry is evolving rapidly, and Vanguard needs a much more modern vision. We need someone who truly understands luxury branding and the elite customer experience. I am bringing Chloe in to take over operations. I stood there, the heavy stack of contracts pressing into my forearms, genuinely wondering if he was playing some sort of cruel, elaborate prank. I looked from Marcus to Chloe, who was now flipping her hair over her shoulder and looking at me as if I were a stain on the carpet. "You want Chloe to handle operations?" I asked, keeping my tone deadly serious and perfectly level. For a highly regulated private charter fleet, Marcus, she does not even know the difference between a flight manifest and a cocktail menu. This is federal airspace we are dealing with, not a VIP section at a nightclub in Buckhead. Marcus's face darkened, his fragile ego instantly bruising at my pushback. You forget who you are talking to, Nia. I am the CEO of this company now. My father built this empire, and I am taking it to the next level. Chloe has an eye for aesthetics that this dusty old company desperately needs. Aesthetics do not keep planes from falling out of the sky. I shot back, my patience evaporating. I stepped forward and slammed the massive stack of contracts directly onto the glass table. The loud thud echoed through the room, making Chloe jump and clutch her designer handbag. Do you know what these are, Marcus? These are the restructured fuel leases I spent 3 weeks agonizing over just to save this company from going under. I kept the pilots from walking out the door. I kept the federal inspectors off our backs while you were drinking champagne halfway across the world. Chloe scoffed loudly, a harsh, grating sound that filled the tension-heavy room. She slid off the desk and stepped toward me, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Do not be bitter, just because you lack vision, Nia, she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. You have done a fine job keeping the lights on around here, taking care of the boring paperwork, but it is time for a fresh perspective. I already have plans to completely rebrand the cabin interiors and upgrade our catering partnerships. You are just a hired hand, and Marcus needs a true partner to elevate his family's legacy. You should know when to step aside and let the real bosses take over. A hired hand. The words hung in the air, heavy with breathtaking entitlement and sheer ignorance. I looked at this woman who had never negotiated a contract, never faced down a federal auditor, and never sacrificed a single night of sleep for this company, boldly calling me a hired hand in the very room where I had just saved her boyfriend's fortune. My jaw tightened, but I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me lose my composure. Marcus stood up abruptly, pointing a manicured finger at me. That is enough, Nia. I will not have you disrespecting my partner in my building. I am telling you to clear out your office. You will receive a standard severance package provided you sign a non-disclosure agreement and hand over all your operational files to Chloe by noon. Pack your desk today. For a fraction of a second, a shadow of doubt crossed Marcus's face. The weight of my 30-minute warning hung in the air, cold and absolute. Then predictability took over. He let out a harsh, mocking laugh, looking at Chloe as if I had just told a pathetic, desperate joke. Are you listening to this? He chuckled, shaking his head and adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke suit. The sheer arrogance. You really think this multi-million-dollar company cannot function without you for half an hour? You are delusional, Nia. You are throwing a tantrum because you are being replaced by someone with actual vision. You are not a founder. You are just a glorified secretary who got too comfortable. I stood perfectly still. I did not cry. I did not beg. I did not try to explain the intricate web of federal aviation laws that I had spent a decade mastering to keep his family out of federal prison. When you hold the detonator, you do not need to scream. Marcus reached over and slammed his hand down on the silver button of his desk intercom. Security, I need 2 guards in the executive boardroom immediately. We have a terminated employee who is refusing to leave quietly. He leaned forward, placing both hands flat on the glass table, trying to project the intimidating aura his father used to command effortlessly. On Marcus, it just looked like a child wearing his dad's oversized shoes. You can walk out on your own 2 feet, or they can drag you out in front of everyone. Either way, you are done here. Do not even think about going to your office to pack your things. We will mail you your personal items in a cardboard box. Everything you built belongs to Vanguard now. Leave the property. 2 large security guards appeared at the glass doors. I knew them both. I had personally interviewed them, approved their background checks, and authorized their holiday bonuses last year. They looked deeply uncomfortable, shifting their weight and actively avoiding eye contact with me. They knew exactly who I was. They knew I was the one who kept the lights on when Desmond had his stroke, the one who ensured their paychecks cleared when the company accounts were frozen. I did not wait for them to grab my arms. I turned on my heel and walked out of the boardroom. My posture was perfectly straight, my shoulders back, my heels clicking a steady, unbothered rhythm against the polished hardwood floor. The executive floor of Vanguard Aviation was designed as an open concept space, essentially a giant fishbowl of productivity. Word traveled incredibly fast in a company that ran on high-stakes massive egos and tight deadlines. By the time I stepped out of the boardroom, the usual chaotic hum of the office had completely died down. Dozens of employees had stopped working to watch the confrontation unfold. Senior dispatchers, flight coordinators, mechanics holding clipboards, and junior executives stood frozen at their cubicles. They watched in absolute stunned silence as the woman who had approved their emergency leave, managed their routes, and kept the company from going under just weeks prior was being escorted out like a corporate spy. I caught the eye of my lead flight dispatcher, a veteran named Thomas, who had been with the company even longer than I had. He was holding a stack of flight manifests, his mouth slightly open in shock. I gave him a single, subtle nod. Thomas swallowed hard and looked down at his glowing monitors. He was a smart, seasoned professional. He knew something massive was about to break, even if he did not know exactly what it was yet. Marcus followed closely behind me and the security guards, making sure his display of power was witnessed by every single person in the building. He was puffing his chest loudly, issuing trivial orders to his assistant as he walked, playing the role of the tough, decisive new boss, making the hard calls to cut dead weight. He wanted me to feel profoundly humiliated. He wanted me to look back, to shrink, to show some sign of defeat, panic, or sorrow in front of the staff I had led for a decade. I gave him absolutely nothing. I did not look back. I did not speed up my pace to escape the uncomfortable stares. I walked with the calm, terrifying grace of a woman who knows a tsunami is coming, while everyone else is busy admiring the tide going out. As we reached the main elevator bank, the doors slid open. I stepped inside the stainless steel car and turned around. The two security guards stayed in the lobby, flanked by Marcus, who stood with his arms crossed over his chest. He met my gaze with a triumphant, condescending glare as the metal doors slowly began to slide shut between us. He smirked clearly, believing he had just won the greatest victory of his life, successfully removing the only obstacle between him and total control of his father's empire. The doors clicked shut, cutting off his smug face. The elevator began its descent to the ground floor. I pulled my phone from my pocket and checked the time. He had wasted 5 minutes of his grace period trying to publicly humiliate me. The elevator hummed quietly as it dropped floor by floor. I leaned against the cool metal wall and let out a slow, steady breath. 10 years of my life had been poured into the foundation of Vanguard Aviation. I had sacrificed relationships, sleep, and my own peace of mind to build the Black-owned luxury aviation empire they loved to brag about in magazines. They thought I was walking away empty-handed. They thought I was just collateral damage in Marcus's desperate bid to prove he was a king. But a king is nothing without his kingdom, and Marcus was about to learn that he did not own the land his castle was built on. I stepped out of the elevator into the sunlit lobby, pushing through the revolving doors and walking out into the heavy, humid Atlanta air. I headed straight for my car in the executive parking lot, my mind already calculating the precise legal maneuvers I was about to execute. I slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled out onto the street, leaving Vanguard Aviation behind me. 25 minutes left. I did not drive far. I pulled my car into the parking garage directly across the street, backing into a spot on the 4th floor that gave me a perfect, unobstructed view of Vanguard's massive glass facade. I put the car in park, left the engine running, and pulled my laptop from my leather tote bag. I connected to my mobile hotspot and logged into the highly secure Federal Aviation Administration portal. You see, Marcus fired me assuming Vanguard owned the sky. What he did not know, because he never bothered to read the foundational legal documents of his own supposed empire, was the dark history of his father's finances. 5 years ago, Desmond made a series of reckless investments that nearly bankrupted his entire family. When Vanguard needed to secure and renew our FAA Part 135 operating certificate, the holy grail that legally allows a company to operate private charter flights for compensation, the federal government flagged the company. The FAA does not hand over commercial flying rights to entities drowning in unresolved financial liabilities and terrible credit. To save the company from immediate closure back then, I offered a radical solution. I created an independent limited liability company under my own name. My credit was flawless. My financial record was immaculate. The federal government granted the Part 135 certificate to my LLC, not Vanguard. Vanguard Aviation simply operated under an exclusive ironclad leasing agreement with my company. My name was on the federal license. My signature authorized every single commercial flight that left that runway. I was not just the chief operating officer. Legally speaking, I was the only reason they were allowed to operate as a charter business at all. Marcus did not just fire an employee today. By terminating my contract without cause and forcibly removing me from the premises, he legally severed Vanguard's operational agreement with my holding company. He handed me the exact legal grounds I needed to revoke their authorization to fly. 10 minutes left. 5 minutes. I watched the digital clock on my dashboard tick down with absolute precision. When the screen flashed to 30 minutes exactly, I opened the master control dashboard. I clicked on the Operational Status tab. I selected the revocation clause due to breach of contract. A high-security prompt popped up on my screen asking me to confirm the suspension of all operational authorization for the Vanguard Aviation fleet. I typed in my passcode and clicked Confirm without a single hesitation. Immediately, my screen updated. The status indicator changed from an active vibrant green to a blaring unauthorized red. I looked up through my windshield at the glass building across the street. On the third floor, where the dispatch and flight control center was located, I could clearly see the massive digital tracking boards mounted on the walls. I knew exactly what was happening in that room. The federal system refresh had just hit their servers. The dispatchers who were currently attempting to file flight plans for the afternoon VYP routes were suddenly receiving hard rejections from air traffic control. The federal system had just flagged every single Vanguard tail number as unauthorized for commercial flight. Through the glass, the scene shifted from a steady, organized hum of productivity to absolute pandemonium. I watched people standing up abruptly from their desks. The glowing green dots on their tracking monitors, which represented our multi-million-dollar Gulfstreams and Bombardiers in the air and on the tarmac, blinked rapidly before turning into stark, angry red warning symbols. I watched Thomas, my lead dispatcher, pick up his desk phone, slam it down, and sprint down the hallway toward the executive suites. Marcus was about to learn a very expensive lesson in federal law. An aircraft without a Part 135 certificate is nothing more than a giant heavy piece of metal sitting on the ground. They could not legally fly a single paying client. No politicians heading to Washington for evening galas. No professional athletes flying to their playoff games. No corporate executives closing international deals. Every single flight scheduled for the rest of the day, the week, the month was instantly and legally grounded. Planes that were currently taxiing on runways across the country were being ordered by air traffic control to return to their gates. Wealthy clients who paid tens of thousands of dollars for premium service were about to be escorted off those planes, furious and demanding answers. I watched through the glass as Marcus stormed into the dispatch center. Even from across the street, I could see his arms flailing as he shouted at the staff. He was pointing violently at the red tracking boards, demanding answers that his employees simply could not give him. Chloe trailed a few steps behind him, clutching her phone to her chest, looking completely lost and entirely useless. The fresh perspective and aesthetic vision she promised to bring to the company meant absolutely nothing when the federal government locked the doors to the sky. My phone, sitting at the passenger seat, suddenly lit up. The caller ID flashed Marcus's name. It rang until it went to voicemail. 10 seconds later, it rang again. Then a text message came through demanding I pick up the phone immediately. The realization had finally hit him. The arrogance was gone, replaced by raw, unadulterated panic. He was watching millions of dollars in revenue burn to the ground in real time, and he knew he was the one who had struck the match. I did not answer. I closed my laptop, the satisfying click echoing in the quiet space of my car. I took one last look at the chaotic ant farm across the street. The Empire had officially stopped flying. I put my car in drive, pulled out of the parking garage, and headed home to pour myself a well-deserved glass of bourbon. The real war was just beginning, but I had already won the first battle. The peace of my morning was shattered precisely at 8 o'clock the next day. I was standing in the kitchen of my Buckhead townhouse, savoring the quiet and the rich aroma of pour-over coffee. My phone had been vibrating off the marble kitchen island for 14 straight hours, a relentless buzzing symphony of panic from Marcus corporate board members and Vanguard's frantic investors. I had silenced it all. I was fully prepared for the fallout, but I did not expect the devil to deliver the first legal blow in person. 3 sharp, aggressive knocks hammered against my front door. It was not the polite knock of a delivery driver or a neighbor. It was the heavy, entitled pounding of a man who believed doors should automatically open the moment he arrived. I tightened the belt of my silk robe, walked calmly to the foyer, and pulled the door open. Standing on my porch was Liam. He was Marcus's brother-in-law, married to Marcus's younger sister Maya, and he served as Vanguard Aviation's general counsel. Liam was a 36-year-old white corporate lawyer who weaponized his law degree to bully anyone he deemed beneath his social tax bracket. He wore a crisp navy suit, clutching a thick manila envelope in his fist, and carried a look of utter disdain that he did not even try to hide. If you were watching this play out through a camera lens, you would see me looking down at him from the elevated threshold of my front door, forcing a steep, low angle that established exactly who held the power. The neighborhood behind him blurred into a meaningless wash of morning light and trees as he aggressively stepped forward, attempting to dominate the frame and invade my personal space. I did not step back. I did not shrink. I stood my ground, my chin tilted up, forcing him to look me in the eye. "Nia," he said, skipping any pretense of a polite greeting. He shoved the manila envelope toward my chest. I did not raise my hands to take it. I let the envelope hit my robe and slide to the porch mat, landing squarely between our feet. Liam scoffed, shaking his head with a bitter, humorless smile. "You can let it sit on the ground, but you have officially been served. That is a formal cease and desist order, alongside a notice of pending litigation for corporate sabotage, extortion, and theft of company property." I took a slow sip of my coffee. The warm steam curled into the cold space between us. "Are you finished, Liam? Or did you drive all the way to Buckhead just to litter on my porch?" Liam crossed his arms, leaning in close, his voice dropping into a harsh, commanding register. "You really overplayed your hand this time. I get it. You are angry. You got emotional because Marcus finally put you in your place yesterday. But shutting down the federal operating systems of a multi-million-dollar enterprise, that is a federal crime, Nia. It is not some cute little stunt you can pull to throw a tantrum because your feelings were hurt." He took another half step forward, pointing a finger an inch from my face. "Let us be very clear about how this is going to play out. You are going to log back into the FAA portal right now and transfer the Part 135 certificate back to Vanguard. You are going to sign a document admitting you acted out of spite and momentary instability. If you do that, I might be able to convince Marcus not to press criminal charges. If you refuse, I will personally see to it that you are completely destroyed." I watched him analyze his own performance. It was Intimidation 101. He was trying to scare me into compliance because he knew deep down that Marcus had completely screwed up. If they had a legitimate legal leg to stand on, federal agents would be knocking on my door, not the brother-in-law playing errand boy. "You are sweating, Liam." I noted, my voice dangerously calm. "It is barely 50 degrees outside and there is sweat pooling at your temples. You are not here as a conquering hero. You are here because Marcus called you crying yesterday afternoon when he realized he grounded his own fleet. You spent the entire night frantically digging through federal aviation statutes trying to find a loophole to save him, and you found absolutely nothing." Liam's jaw tightened. The accusation hit a raw nerve because it was absolutely true. "I do not think you grasp the reality of your situation," he sneered, his face turning a mottled shade of red. He completely dropped the polished lawyer act, letting his true colors bleed through. You are a black woman from the South Side who got incredibly lucky that Desmond decided to play savior and give you a job. You should have been grateful. Instead, you forgot where you came from. You forgot that you are highly replaceable. You actually convinced yourself you were untouchable just because you handled some administrative paperwork. You people always mistake charity for entitlement. The blatant racially coded venom in his voice was designed to trigger me to make me become the angry, irrational woman he wanted me to be. I felt a spike of pure rage ignite in my chest, but I kept my face perfectly still. Silence is often far more terrifying than a scream. You stole company property, Liam growled, mistaking my silence for submission. That certificate belongs to Vanguard. It is the lifeblood of my wife's family legacy. I am sure the authorities would love to hear from a woman currently holding a luxury fleet hostage, he continued, his voice rising and echoing through my quiet neighborhood. It is exactly the kind of aggressive, irrational behavior I warned Desmond about years ago. I told him giving you too much authority was a massive liability. I told him you were too emotional, too ungrateful to handle real corporate power. I have the full weight of Vanguard's legal department behind me, he threatened, jabbing his finger toward the envelope on the ground. I have federal investigators on speed dial. Do you know what happens to people like you who try to extort people like us? The system crushes you. We will freeze your bank accounts by noon. We will put a lien on this beautiful house you bought with our money. We will drag your name through the mud until you cannot get a job managing a fast food restaurant, let alone another aviation firm. He leaned back, breathing heavily, entirely satisfied with his own monstrous monologue. You are not walking away from this with a massive payout, Nia. There is no settlement check coming to save you. You are going to hand over the operational rights immediately, or I am going to make an example out of you. I will have you locked in a federal penitentiary before the end of the fiscal quarter. You better pack a bag, because where you are going, you will not need your tailored suits. Liam stands there panting, completely satisfied with his venomous monologue. A triumphant smirk plays on his lips. He genuinely believes he has cornered me. If someone were filming this interaction, the camera would be cutting rapidly between his flushed, arrogant face and my completely blank, unblinking stare. I let the silence stretch out heavy and suffocating. I do not flinch. I do not justify myself. I simply watch him, waiting for the exact moment his adrenaline peaks so I can rip the floor out from under him. Are you quite finished projecting your own profound insecurities onto my front porch? Liam, I ask. My voice is quiet, smooth, and utterly devoid of fear. I look down at the manila envelope resting by my slippers. I bend down, pick it up, and casually drop it into the small recycling bin I keep near the entryway. You really should have done your homework before you came to my house threatening me with federal prison, I tell him. Wait right there. I turn my back on him, leaving the front door wide open. It is the ultimate display of disrespect, showing him I do not view him as a physical or legal threat in the slightest. I walk into my foyer, open the top drawer of my custom entryway console, and pull out a sleek black leather portfolio. I walk back to the doorway and hold it out to him. Liam frowns, his thick eyebrows pulling together in confusion. He does not take it immediately. What is this? He demands, trying to maintain his authoritative bark. This is the document you should have read before you let your arrogant, entirely incompetent brother-in-law fire the only person keeping this family out of bankruptcy court, I reply. Take it. Read it, counselor. Liam snatches the portfolio from my hand. He opens it and I watch his eyes scan the first page. The confident smirk that had been plastered across his face begins to falter instantly. The document is titled Master Vendor and Licensing Agreement. It is signed by Desmond, the founder of Vanguard Aviation, and myself. It is dated exactly 5 years ago. I decide to narrate the terms for him, speaking slowly and making sure every single syllable registers in his brain. You just called me an employee, Liam. You just accused me of stealing company property. But if you bother to read Section 4, you will see that I am not, and have never legally been an employee of Vanguard Aviation. I am an independent contractor. My holding company, which holds the FAA Part 135 operating certificate, is a completely separate legal entity. The color begins to drain from Liam's face. He flips to the second page, his eyes darting frantically across the heavy legal jargon. His legal training is finally kicking in, overriding his racial bias and his misplaced loyalty to Marcus. Desmond knew his personal credit was completely destroyed 5 years ago. I continue taking a step forward. He knew the federal government would never grant him commercial flying rights with his history of defaulted loans and shady tax filings. So he begged me to use my pristine financial record to secure the certificate. But Desmond was a smart man. He knew the risks. He happily signed this contract stating that my company licenses the operational rights to Vanguard on a month-to-month basis. Furthermore, that license is strictly contingent upon my direct daily oversight as Chief Operating Officer. The reality of the situation crashes into Liam like a physical blow. He realizes with horrifying clarity that Marcus did not consult the legal department yesterday morning. Marcus acted purely on ego. He wanted to impress his Instagram model girlfriend, so he marched into the boardroom and fired me blindly without a single thought about the legal framework of his own business. When Marcus fired me yesterday, I say my voice razor sharp. He did not just terminate an executive. He unilaterally severed Vanguard's vendor agreement with my LLC. By forcing me to pack my desk and formally removing my oversight, he legally relinquished all operational rights. I did not steal a single thing, Liam. Your brother-in-law voluntarily threw the keys to the kingdom into the garbage. I simply locked the door behind him. Liam is entirely speechless. The confident racist bully who was threatening to destroy my life 2 minutes ago has vanished into thin air. He looks down at the paper, his hands visibly shaking. The sweat pooling at his temples is no longer from the morning humidity. It is the cold, terrifying sweat of a lawyer who realizes his client is dead in the water. He has absolutely no legal defense. The cease and desist he drafted is completely worthless. You cannot do this, Liam stammers. His voice is barely a whisper, completely stripped of its previous venom. Desmond will lose everything. My wife will lose her entire inheritance. Vanguard is everything they have. I lean against the doorframe, crossing my arms. You should have thought about your wife's inheritance before you drove to my house to hurl racial insults at me. You should have told Marcus to actually read a contract before he tried to flex his non-existent authority in front of his girlfriend. Liam tries to salvage the situation. The shift is almost comical. He goes from extortionist to beggar in a matter of seconds. He closes the portfolio and tries to hand it back to me with shaking hands. Listen, Nia, let us be reasonable. Marcus made a massive mistake. He is hot-headed. He was just trying to assert dominance because of his father's medical condition. I can fix this. I will tear up the cease and desist right now. We can draft a new agreement. I can write you a massive check today right from the corporate account if you just log back into the portal and turn the green lights back on. I look at him with pure, unadulterated disgust. There is no check big enough to buy back my disrespect, Liam. I step forward, forcing him to take a clumsy step backward down the porch stairs. Take your useless legal threats out of my recycling bin. Go back to your expensive office. Look Marcus in the eye and tell him he has officially destroyed his father's legacy in less than 24 hours. Liam opens his mouth to plead again, attempting to invoke Desmond's name and how much the old man trusted me, but I cut him off. And if you ever show up on my property again attempting to intimidate me, I will not just have you arrested for trespassing. I will report you to the State Bar Association for attempting to extort an independent vendor. I step back inside my beautiful, quiet home and look at his pale, defeated face one last time. Have a wonderful day, counselor. I close the heavy wooden door, the lock clicking firmly into place. Through the frosted glass panels, I watch Liam stand frozen on my porch for a long time before he finally turns and shuffles back to his luxury sedan. The mighty legal threat had been neutralized in under 5 minutes. But I knew Marcus and his new girlfriend were not going to stop there. If they could not beat me with the law, they were going to try to beat me in the court of public opinion. They were about to make a very desperate, very public mistake. If you were tracking my movements through a camera lens that Saturday evening, you would see a wide sweeping shot of the Magnolia Heights Country Club. The crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over the grand ballroom. A live jazz quartet played softly in the corner, and the room was packed with the most influential figures of Atlanta's elite. I arrived wearing a backless emerald silk gown, carrying myself with the exact same unbothered confidence I always possessed. For 3 years, I had served on the executive board of this pediatric healthcare charity. I had personally secured half the corporate sponsorships in that room. But the moment I stepped past the velvet ropes, the atmospheric shift was immediate and freezing. The Black elite of Atlanta is an incredibly tight-knit circle, and gossip is its primary currency. Information travels faster than a private jet, and Marcus knew exactly how to pilot a smear campaign. Since they could not admit the humiliating truth that Marcus had grounded his own luxury fleet by firing the only person legally authorized to fly it, they had to invent a narrative. They needed a story perfectly tailored to scandalize the church aunties, the society matrons, and the charity board members. Marcus and Chloe had spent the last 48 hours aggressively weaponizing their social connections. According to the venomous rumors now circulating the ballroom, I had not been fired over a business dispute. The lie Marcus spun was that I was caught embezzling massive amounts of company funds to support a lavish secret lifestyle. But they did not stop at financial fraud. Chloe had taken it a step further, planting whispers that when Marcus confronted me about the missing money, I threw myself at him in a desperate, pathetic attempt to keep my job. The narrative was designed to completely assassinate my character. I was painted as an unstable, predatory woman who simply could not handle rejection from the wealthy, handsome heir to the Vanguard empire. Marcus played the role of the noble son perfectly. He positioned himself as the reluctant hero trying to protect his sick father's legacy from a greedy, manipulative outsider. And in this particular social circle, the impulse to protect the wealthy son over the self-made woman is a deeply ingrained reflex. As I walked through the crowded ballroom, the physical manifestation of social exile unfolded around me. Women who had kissed my cheek and begged me for discounted charter flights just a week ago suddenly found their champagne flutes endlessly fascinating. Men who had praised my business acumen actively turned their backs, forming physical walls to block me from their circles. Whispers erupted the second I passed by, trailing behind me like a toxic cloud. I approached table number 1, the premium VIP section reserved for the charity's executive board. I had paid for a quarter of that table out of my own pocket. But sitting directly in my usual seat was Chloe. She was wearing a diamond tennis necklace she had undoubtedly purchased with Vanguard's rapidly dwindling corporate credit. She was giggling loudly, sipping a martini and holding court with the wives of 2 local politicians. Marcus sat beside her, his arm draped possessively over the back of her chair. Before I could even reach the table, my path was blocked by Vivian. Vivian was the charity chairwoman, an older, deeply influential society matron who considered herself the ultimate gatekeeper of Atlanta respectability. She wore a forced, deeply uncomfortable smile, but her eyes were completely devoid of warmth. "Nia, sweetheart," Vivian said, her voice dripping with that specific brand of southern condescension that cuts deeper than a knife. She placed a heavily ringed hand on my arm, attempting to steer me away from the VIP section and toward the exit corridor. "I am so sorry, but we have a slight seating issue tonight." I stopped walking, forcing her to drop her hand. "There is no seating issue, Vivian. My name is on the benefactor list, and I paid for seat A at table 1. Vivian sighed, dropping the polite facade and adopting a tone of disappointed pity. "Nia, please do not make this difficult. The board had an emergency meeting this afternoon. In light of the recent unfortunate allegations regarding your departure from Vanguard Aviation, we feel it is best if you step down from your leadership role. We simply cannot have this kind of scandal attached to the children's charity. Marcus has graciously offered to double Vanguard's corporate donation this year to cover your usual contribution. We think it is best if you leave quietly to avoid causing a scene." The sheer audacity of the betrayal was staggering. Vivian had known me for years. She knew my work ethic, my integrity, and my dedication. Yet she instantly believed the malicious lies of an arrogant heir simply because he promised to write a larger check. She was actively participating in my public shunning to protect the comfort of the elite circle. I looked past Vivian's shoulder. Marcus was watching the entire exchange. A sickeningly triumphant grin stretched across his face. He caught my eye and raised his crystal glass in a mocking toast. Chloe leaned into him, whispering something that made them both laugh. Marcus thought he had outsmarted me. He genuinely believed that by stripping me of my social standing and humiliating me in front of the people I respected, he could break my spirit. He thought shame would force me into hiding. He was dead wrong. I turned my attention back to the charity chairwoman. My expression remained perfectly composed, a mask of absolute unbothered calm. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a tear. I did not give anyone in that room the angry, emotional reaction they were so desperately waiting for. Vivian. I said, my voice smooth and carrying just enough volume to be heard by the surrounding tables. You are absolutely right. The integrity of this charity is paramount. I would hate to associate my name with an organization that values a bouncing check over basic loyalty. Vivian frowned, her brow furrowing in confusion. A bouncing check? I smiled a sharp, genuine smile. I highly recommend you cash Marcus's generous donation by Monday morning, Vivian. Because by Tuesday, Vanguard Aviation will not have enough liquid assets to pay the catering bill for this gala, let alone fund your pediatric wing. If you prefer the company of a man who is currently bleeding his father's company dry over the woman who actually built it, you are more than welcome to him. I did not wait for her response. I simply turned and walked away. I moved through the grand ballroom with my head held high, my posture immaculate, radiating a terrifying level of confidence. I felt the stares burning into my back, but they no longer felt like judgment. They felt like irrelevance. Marcus and Chloe had won the battle of the country club. They got to sit at the VIP table and bask in their fake authority. They got to enjoy the temporary adoration of a social circle that only loved them for their perceived wealth. But I knew the reality of their situation. I knew the Federal Aviation Administration was already circling. I knew their high-profile clients were currently receiving cancellation notices for their upcoming flights. Let them have their champagne and their rumors. Let them enjoy the music and the applause. I stepped out into the cool night air, handing my ticket to the valet. I was perfectly fine with being the villain in their fabricated story, because while they were busy playing corporate dress-up at a charity gala, I was preparing to unleash a financial bloodbath that would wipe their entire existence off the map. If you were directing the movie version of my life, the morning after the charity gala would require a seamless high-contrast split screen. On one side of the screen, you would see my home office in Buckhead. The space is a sanctuary of quiet, methodical precision. Sunlight pours through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating 3 massive monitors arranged on my mahogany desk. I am wearing a simple cashmere lounge set, my hair pulled back, sipping black coffee, while I meticulously draft the foundational operating agreements for my next business venture. There is no music playing. There is only the crisp, deliberate sound of my fingertips striking the keyboard. On the other side of the screen, the visual would be a chaotic explosion of loud colors, frantic energy, and sheer, unfiltered vanity. You would see Chloe standing on the sun-baked tarmac of the Vanguard Aviation private hangar. She is wearing a skin-tight designer jumpsuit and oversized sunglasses, holding her phone high in the air to broadcast an Instagram live to her hundreds of thousands of followers. Chloe was desperate. I knew from my remaining loyal contacts inside the building that Vanguard was currently hemorrhaging cash. High-profile clients had been receiving continuous rejection notices from the automated booking system all morning because the Federal Tracking Board remained locked in a glaring, unauthorized red state. Marcus was hiding in his office, screening calls from furious politicians and business moguls whose weekend travel plans had been abruptly canceled. Chloe needed a public relations victory, and she needed it immediately to prove to Marcus, to the employees, and to her social media followers that she was a legitimate corporate boss. Her golden opportunity arrived in the form of a Grammy-winning Atlanta rapper who needed an emergency charter flight to Miami for a music video shoot. The rapper was a platinum-tier client, the kind of customer who spent hundreds of thousands of dollars a year with us. When he called the dispatch center, the junior coordinators correctly told him the fleet was currently grounded due to a system maintenance issue. Chloe overheard this, marched over to the dispatch desk, and completely overrode their authority. She promised the rapper a flagship Gulfstream G650 would be fueled and ready on the tarmac within the hour. Chloe did not understand that aviation is not the hospitality industry. You cannot simply smooth over a mechanical or legal issue with a complimentary bottle of champagne and a charming smile. Operating a commercial charter flight without an active FAA Part 135 certificate is not a minor administrative oversight. It is a federal crime. It is a direct violation of United States airspace laws, carrying catastrophic fines, the permanent revocation of pilot licenses, and potential federal prison time for the executives involved. Chloe thought ordering a private jet was exactly like ordering an Uber Black. She had absolutely no idea she was strapping a legal bomb to her own chest. As I sat in my quiet home office reviewing my legal documents, my private cell phone vibrated against the desk. The caller ID flashed the name Captain Marcus Reynolds. He was Vanguard's chief pilot, a decorated Air Force veteran who had flown with the company for 8 years. I had personally recruited him. He was a man of absolute integrity, and I knew exactly why he was calling me on a Saturday morning. I picked up the phone. "Good morning, Captain," I answered, my voice steady and warm. "Nia, I am standing in the hangar right now, and I need you to tell me exactly what is going on," Captain Reynolds said. His voice was low, tight, with barely contained frustration. The new girl, Chloe, just shoved a flight manifest into my chest. She is ordering my crew to prep the Gulfstream for a Miami run. But my dispatch board is bleeding red. The system says our Part 135 operational certificate has been revoked. She is telling me it is just an IT glitch and threatening to fire me on the spot for insubordination if I do not start the engines. Tell me I'm not crazy, Nia. The certificate is pulled, right? "You are not crazy, Captain," I replied smoothly. "The certificate is legally tied to my holding company. When Marcus terminated my contract, the authorization went with me. If you put that Gulfstream in the air today, you will be flying an illegal commercial charter. The FAA will strip you of your pilot's license the second your landing gear touches the runway in Miami." I heard a heavy exhale on the other end of the line. "That is what I thought," he muttered. "That arrogant little girl is going to get my crew arrested to impress a rapper. I am walking off the job right now. I will not fly for these people." I took a slow sip of my coffee, my eyes fixed on my center monitor. "Captain, do not walk away just yet," I advised, a sharp, calculating smile forming on my lips. "If you walk away, she will just bully a junior pilot who does not know any better into taking the fall. I need you to protect the crew. Go back out to the tarmac. Tell Chloe you are happy to fly, but you need to run an extensive mandated pre-flight safety check. Stall her. Take a full 45 minutes to inspect the landing gear. I will handle the rest." "Understood," Captain Reynolds replied, a hint of dark amusement slipping into his voice. "Give them hell, Nia." The line went dead. I set my phone down and dragged my mouse over to my right monitor. I opened a new browser window and typed in the URL for the Federal Aviation Administration's primary reporting portal. Because of my decade in the industry, I did not just know the generic hotline. I knew the direct office extension and the secure reporting email of Inspector Davies, the strict no-nonsense federal regulator who oversaw all commercial charter operations in the Southeast region. On my left monitor, I opened a fake Instagram account I used for market research. I navigated to Chloe's profile and clicked on her glowing profile picture. The screen instantly filled with her live broadcast. There she was, standing proudly in front of the gleaming white Gulfstream jet. The Atlanta sun was reflecting off the polished fuselage. Chloe was blowing kisses to the camera, holding up a glass of mimosa provided by the VIP catering staff. "We do not let haters stop the hustle," Chloe announced to her thousands of viewers, her voice dripping with artificial confidence. They tried to say Vanguard was struggling, but your girl is officially running operations now. We are putting our best clients in the air today. CEO Wifey making big moves. Atlanta to Miami, we are taking over. She turned the camera around to show off the luxury jet. It was a fatal, spectacularly stupid mistake. In her desperation to capture the perfect social media flex, she framed the entire tail of the aircraft perfectly in the shot. The highly visible, unmistakable registration tail number was broadcast live to the entire internet. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I moved my cursor back to the federal portal on my center screen. My hands hovered over the keyboard. I did not type out an angry, emotional rant. I did not mention Marcus the Country Club or the personal insults they had hurled at me. I was a professional, and I spoke the cold, undisputed language of federal compliance. I typed out a highly detailed, methodical report. I cited the exact time, the specific location on the Vanguard tarmac, and the exact tail number of the Gulfstream G65. Oh, that Chloe had so graciously provided on her live stream. I clearly stated that unauthorized personnel acting under the Vanguard Aviation banner were actively preparing to launch a commercial passenger flight without a valid Part 135 operating certificate. I attached a screen recording of Chloe's Instagram Live as undisputable real-time video evidence of the impending federal crime. I reviewed the text one last time to ensure it was absolutely devoid of any personal bias. It was nothing but clinical, devastating facts. I moved my mouse over the submit button. I glanced back at the left monitor. Chloe was now posing with the rapper who had just arrived in a convoy of black SUVs. They were laughing, clinking glasses, completely oblivious to the legal guillotine hanging directly over their heads. I clicked submit. The federal portal flashed a green confirmation checkmark. The anonymous tip was officially in the hands of Inspector Davies. There was no reversing it now. The federal machinery had been activated, and it was a beast that did not care about designer clothes, elite social circles, or Marcus's fragile ego. I leaned back in my ergonomic desk chair, interlacing my fingers, and watched the live stream continue to play on my screen. I did not need to scream or throw a tantrum. I did not need to stand on a porch and hurl racial insults like Liam. True power does not have to announce itself. True power sits in a quiet, sunlit room, presses a single button, and watches the entire false empire burn to the ground. All I had to do now was wait for the sirens. If you were holding the camera for this exact moment, you would need to drop the smooth, stabilized equipment entirely. You would swap it for a shaky handheld rig, sprinting across the blistering hot concrete of the Vanguard Aviation tarmac to capture the sheer, unadulterated chaos unfolding in real time. The visual frame would be fast-jarring and completely out of control, perfectly mirroring the catastrophic collapse of Marcus's false authority. Out on the runway, the heavy, humid Atlanta heat was radiating off the white fuselage of the Gulfstream G65. Oh. Captain Reynolds was playing his part with the precision of a seasoned combat veteran. He was slowly, methodically inspecting the landing gear for the third time, using a small flashlight to check rivets that did not need checking. The platinum-tier rapper and his entourage of 8 people were growing increasingly restless. They were standing near the boarding stairs, dripping in heavy diamond chains, and holding designer duffel bags, sweating under the midday sun. Chloe was completely oblivious to the growing irritation of her VIP client. She was still holding her phone high, narrating her fabulous life as a newly minted aviation executive to her digital audience, completely unaware that she had just broadcasted her own legal execution. She waved her manicured hand toward the aircraft, promising the rapper that the engines would be turning over any second. She did not even hear the sirens until it was too late. The heavy steel security gates at the far end of the private hangar did not just open, they were violently breached. 3 black, unmarked government SUVs tore through the entrance, their tires screeching against the hot tarmac. Red and blue emergency lights flashed brilliantly against the dark-tinted windows of the vehicles. They sped directly toward the Gulfstream, cutting off the path of the aircraft and surrounding it in a tight tactical formation. Chloe dropped her phone. The live stream abruptly ended, hitting the concrete with a sharp crack. The doors of the SUVs swung open simultaneously. A half-dozen federal agents stepped out wearing tactical vests and windbreakers with bright yellow letters spelling out FAA and federal law enforcement across their backs. Leading the pack was Inspector Davies. He was a tall, imposing man with absolutely no patience for corporate entitlement or social media influencers. He marched straight past the bewildered security detail, bypassed the rapper's imposing bodyguards, and planted himself directly at the base of the aircraft stairs. Captain Reynolds immediately stepped back, raising his hands in a gesture of total compliance, a sharp contrast to Chloe, who was currently hyperventilating. "Shut it down!" Inspector Davies ordered, his voice cutting through the heavy air like a whip. "Nobody boards this aircraft. Nobody loads any baggage. This entire operation is frozen by order of the Federal Aviation Administration." The rapper stepped forward, his face twisted in a mixture of confusion and fury. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, gesturing toward his entourage. "I paid $70,000 for this charter to Miami. I have a music video shoot in 3 hours. Get out of my way." Inspector Davies did not even blink. He pulled a heavy clipboard from his side and looked the rapper dead in the eye. "Sir, you did not pay for a legal charter flight. You paid to participate in an illegal, unauthorized commercial operation. The company attempting to fly you today does not possess a valid Part 135 operating certificate. If you step onto those stairs, you are accessory to a federal crime. I highly suggest you gather your team and leave the premises immediately." The rapper froze. He was a businessman who understood the difference between a minor inconvenience and a federal indictment. He looked at Chloe, his expression shifting from annoyance to absolute rage. He realized instantly that he had been played by an amateur. He grabbed his designer bag from the tarmac, signaled to his security team, and stormed toward his waiting convoy of black SUVs. "You owe me every single cent back plus damages," he yelled over his shoulder, pointing a furious finger at Chloe. "My lawyers are going to tear this fake company apart. You are a joke." Chloe stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She tried to deploy her usual defense mechanism, attempting to charm her way out of a consequence. "Excuse me," she stammered, stepping toward Inspector Davies and offering a trembling, artificial smile. "There is a huge misunderstanding here. I am the Director of Operations. This is just a minor IT glitch with our portal. We are a premier luxury brand, and you are scaring away our best clients. Do you have any idea who my boyfriend is?" Inspector Davies looked at her with an expression of pure, unadulterated pity. "Ma'am, I do not care who you are dating. I care about federal aviation law. You are currently attempting to operate a heavy commercial jet without a legal license, which is a catastrophic violation of United States airspace regulations. Step away from the aircraft before I have you detained." At that exact moment, Marcus sprinted out of the main terminal building. He was sweating profusely, his custom-tailored suit jacket flapping wildly behind him. He had watched the raid unfold from his office window and was now running onto the tarmac, desperately trying to salvage his shattered pride. "What is the meaning of this?" Marcus shouted out of breath and pointing wildly at the federal agents. "You cannot just storm onto my property. I am Marcus Vanguard. My family built this airfield. You have absolutely no right to touch my planes." Inspector Davies turned his attention to the newly minted CEO. He did not yell. He did not argue. He simply opened his clipboard and pulled out a stack of dense, officially stamped federal documents. "Marcus Vanguard, you are officially being served," Inspector Davies stated, his voice echoing across the silent tarmac. "As the acting executive of this facility, you are being cited for gross violations of federal aviation codes. You have knowingly attempted to operate an illegal commercial charter and endangered public airspace." Marcus tried to interrupt, opening his mouth to spew whatever legal jargon Liam had fed him earlier that morning, but Davies cut him off instantly. "Because you openly advertised this flight, accepted compensation, and attempted to load passengers without a valid operating certificate, the Federal Aviation Administration is levying an immediate, non-negotiable penalty. You are being fined $2 million effective immediately. Furthermore, every single aircraft on this property is officially impounded pending a full federal investigation into your operational history. Marcus stumbled backward as if he had been physically struck. The blood drained from his face entirely. $2 million. It was not a slap on the wrist. It was not a warning. It was a fatal, paralyzing blow to a company that was already struggling to make payroll. He looked at the imposing federal agents. He looked at his impounded fleet. And finally, he looked at Chloe, who was currently sobbing onto the shoulder of her designer jumpsuit. Back in my home office, my private cell phone buzzed softly against my mahogany desk. I picked it up and opened a text message from Captain Reynolds. It contained only 5 words. The Eagles have been grounded. I locked my phone and set it down, a deep, resonant sense of satisfaction washing over me. Marcus had wanted the throne so desperately, but he never understood the crushing weight of the crown. He thought running a multi-million-dollar aviation empire was about wearing nice suits and throwing his weight around the country club. He was about to learn that true power requires competence, and incompetence comes with a catastrophic price tag. The raid was just the opening act. The financial hemorrhage was about to begin, and I had front-row seats to the destruction. If you were to point a camera at the Vanguard Aviation headquarters by Wednesday morning, you would not use sweeping, dynamic movements. You would lock the camera down on a heavy tripod. You would use cold, static shots to capture the eerie, suffocating stillness of a dying empire. The massive steel hangars, usually echoing with the roar of jet engines, the smell of aviation fuel, and the shouts of mechanics, sat completely empty. The planes were grounded on the tarmac, wrapped in bright yellow federal impound tape. The only sound left in the entire corporate building was the relentless, piercing ring of dozens of desk phones echoing down the empty executive hallways. Nobody was answering them. Vanguard operated on a highly lucrative financial model known as block-hour agreements. Elite clients paid hundreds of thousands of dollars up front to guarantee a specific number of private flight hours for the year. It was a system built entirely on absolute trust and operational reliability. When the news of the Federal Aviation Administration raid hit the local Atlanta business journals, that trust evaporated instantly. The panic among the black elite of the city was immediate and absolute. A prominent Georgia state senator who relied on our discreet charters for his campaign trail had his attorneys draft a breach of contract notice before his morning coffee. He demanded the immediate return of his $200,000 deposit. A star point guard for the Atlanta Hawks, whose entire family was supposed to fly to the Bahamas for a post-season vacation, sent his heavily armed security detail directly to the Vanguard lobby. They bypassed the receptionist entirely, standing outside Marcus's office door to demand a full refund in certified funds. Marcus tried desperately to stop the bleeding, but he had absolutely no understanding of corporate liquidity. He assumed Vanguard had massive cash reserves simply because the company generated millions in gross revenue. He did not understand the razor-thin margins of luxury aviation. Every single dollar that came in was instantly allocated to jet fuel, exorbitant insurance premiums, hangar leases, and highly specialized pilot salaries. The moment the planes stopped flying, the revenue stream violently snapped shut. But the fixed costs kept draining the accounts at an alarming rate. The $2 million federal fine had triggered an automatic panic response from our primary lending bank. The financial institutions realized Vanguard was operating without a valid commercial certificate and immediately froze the corporate credit lines. The creditors began circling like vultures over a carcass. Chloe, who just days ago was bragging on social media about upgrading the champagne menus and redesigning the cabin interiors, suddenly found herself hiding in the executive ladies' room. She was frantically dodging calls from the luxury catering companies she had signed unauthorized contracts with. The vendors she promised to pay on delivery were now threatening to sue her personally because she had completely bypassed the corporate procurement department. The glamorous title of Director of Operations was rapidly transforming into a massive personal liability, and her influencer status could not save her from breach of contract lawsuits. The fatal blow arrived precisely at midnight on Thursday. In the aviation industry, loyalty is bought and maintained through strictly reliable compensation. Pilots, technicians, and mechanics do not work for exposure, and they certainly do not work for arrogant heirs who ground their own fleets. When Friday morning broke, the Vanguard employee portal crashed. The automated payroll deposits had bounced. Every single mechanic, dispatcher, flight attendant, and junior executive checked their bank accounts as they woke up, only to find absolutely nothing. The company accounts lacked the sufficient funds to process the biweekly transfer. Marcus had spent the remaining liquid cash trying to pay off the angry VIP clients who had threatened him with bad press, leaving nothing to pay the people who actually ran his father's business. The resulting mutiny was swift and merciless. By 9 in the morning, the remaining staff gathered in the main lobby of the headquarters. They did not shout. They did not hold a protest or demand negotiations. They simply packed their personal items into cardboard boxes. One by one, they dropped their company keycards into a plastic bin by the front doors and walked out en masse. Marcus stepped out of his corner office. His designer tie loosened, sweat staining the collar of his expensive dress shirt. The polished, untouchable CEO facade had completely melted away. He stood at the top of the grand staircase looking down at his fleeing workforce. He tried to give a motivational speech. He pleaded for patience, promising that a massive influx of capital was coming from private investors. He blamed the federal government for a temporary bureaucratic misunderstanding. He begged them to consider their loyalty to his father's legacy, demanding that Black professionals stick together through hard times. Captain Reynolds, who had officially resigned right after the federal raid, walked back into the lobby just to deliver a final message. He looked up at Marcus, a man who had never earned a single ounce of his respect. Captain Reynolds did not raise his voice. He spoke with the quiet, devastating authority of a man who knew his own worth. He told Marcus that loyalty was a two-way street, and Marcus had paved his side with sheer arrogance and blatant disrespect. He told Marcus that his father built a legacy, but a legacy means absolutely nothing if you hand the keys to a boy who only knows how to crash the car. Marcus was left standing completely alone in the cavernous, silent building. The phones continued to ring, their shrill tones bouncing off the glass walls, unanswered and ignored. From the quiet sanctuary of my home office, I monitored the financial collapse through my deep connections with the corporate banking officers and the remaining junior accountants who were secretly texting me updates. I watched the accounts dry up. The beast was starved, bleeding out on the marble floors of its own headquarters. Marcus was entirely isolated, drowning in a sea of toxic debt and broken contracts. He had alienated his staff, infuriated his wealthiest clients, and paralyzed his fleet. The absolute devastation of Vanguard Aviation was complete, but the true internal war among the remaining vultures was just about to begin. If you were setting the camera for the next chapter of this collapse, you would abandon the wide sweeping shots entirely. You would use a tight, claustrophobic framing, trapping the characters inside Desmond's corner office. The heavy wooden blinds were drawn tightly shut, blocking out the oppressive Atlanta sun, and casting the room in deep, suffocating shadows. The air conditioning had been shut off by the building management company, due to non-payment, leaving the air stale thick and smelling heavily of expensive cologne masking pure panic. Marcus was pacing the length of the expensive Persian rug like a caged animal. He was practically vibrating with frantic energy, his phone glued to his ear as he desperately left another unreturned voicemail for a wealthy investor. The heavy oak door swung open and Liam stepped inside. The dynamic in the room shifted with the force of a physical blow. For years, Liam had played the role of the polite, supportive white son-in-law perfectly. He had happily married into black wealth, attended the charity galas, smiled for the country club photos, and gladly collected a massive salary as Vanguard's general counsel while letting Desmond do the heavy lifting. But Liam was a corporate parasite, and parasites only act polite when the host is healthy. Now that the host was dying, the mask completely slipped. Liam threw a thick stack of legal notices and foreclosure warnings directly onto Marcus's desk. The heavy thud echoed in the dim room, forcing Marcus to drop his phone. "Fix this, Liam," Marcus demanded, his voice cracking with a mixture of fear and his usual unearned authority. "You are the general counsel. Find a loophole. Sue the federal government. Sue Nia for breach of contract. Do your job and get my planes back in the air before the bank seizes the hangars. Liam did not move to open a file. He did not pull out his legal pad or offer a strategic reassurance. He simply stared at Marcus with a look of absolute, unfiltered disgust. "There is no loophole for catastrophic stupidity," Marcus Liam said, his voice dropping into a harsh, venomous register that seemed to suck the remaining oxygen out of the room. "You cannot sue the federal government because your Instagram girlfriend tried to run an illegal charter flight. You cannot sue Nia because you were the one who arrogantly fired her and legally terminated the operational contract. You did this. You took a multi-million-dollar enterprise and drove it straight into a brick wall because your fragile ego could not handle a black woman being smarter than you." Marcus stumbled back, his eyes widening in shock. "Do not talk to me like that in my father's office. You work for me. I work for a company that no longer exists," Liam shot back, taking a slow, menacing step forward intentionally, using his physical presence to back Marcus into a corner. "And do not you dare invoke Desmond's name right now. Desmond spent 30 years enduring unimaginable barriers to build a monument to Black excellence in this city. He built an empire, and the second he was on life support, you handed the keys to a 28-year-old influencer who does not even know how to read a balance sheet." The racial dynamics that Liam had so carefully tiptoed around for a decade were suddenly laid bare in the dim, suffocating office. Liam was looking at Marcus not as an equal, but as a spoiled, incompetent child who had squandered a legacy Liam felt he deserved more. "You had everything handed to you on a silver platter," Liam spat, jabbing a finger at Marcus's chest. "You never had to hustle. You never had to bleed for a single dollar. You walked around Atlanta acting like royalty, playing the brilliant CEO, when everyone in the industry knew Nia was the actual brains behind the operation. Now the money is gone. The respect is gone. You are a laughingstock, and you are dragging my wife and my financial security down into the mud with you." The door to the office pushed open and Maya rushed in. Marcus's younger sister and Liam's wife had been waiting in the hallway listening to the shouting match escalate. She looked terrified, her designer clothes crumpled, her face streaked with tears. She ran between the two men, holding her hands up defensively. "Stop it, both of you," Maya pleaded, her voice trembling. "Liam, please. He is my brother. You are a brilliant lawyer. You have connections all over the city. There has to be a way to restructure the debt or file for protection. You have to save him from federal prison. You have to save my family's legacy." Liam looked down at his wife. The warmth and affection he usually performed for the public were entirely absent. His eyes were cold, calculating, and completely detached. "Your family's legacy is a burning building," Maya Liam stated flatly, stepping away from her and straightening his tie. "And I am not going to let your brother's spectacular incompetence burn me alive. You need to stop worrying about Marcus and start worrying about how you are going to maintain your country club lifestyle when the banks freeze your personal trust funds by Friday." Maya gasped, covering her mouth with her hand, completely devastated by the icy cruelty of her own husband. Marcus tried to step forward to defend his sister, but his own cowardice kept him rooted to the spot. Liam did not spare them another glance. He turned his back on the ruined heirs of Vanguard Aviation and walked out of the claustrophobic office, pulling his cell phone from his breast pocket. From my network of sources, I knew exactly what Liam was doing the moment he stepped out into the quiet, abandoned hallway. Liam was a survivor above all else, a man who possessed no genuine loyalty to Desmond Marcus, or even Maya. As he walked down the hall away from his crying wife and her panicked brother, he dialed a highly confidential number. He was calling a massive private equity firm based in New York, a group of ruthless corporate raiders who specialized in acquiring distressed assets. Liam was not trying to find a legal defense for Marcus. He was actively negotiating a fire sale. He was offering to hand over the absolute entirety of Vanguard Aviation. The client lists the corporate shell and the heavily leveraged hangar leases for pennies on the dollar. Liam was secretly orchestrating a deal that would completely strip Marcus and Maya of their remaining ownership. In exchange for delivering the company on a silver platter to the private equity firm, Liam was demanding a multi-million-dollar golden parachute for himself, complete with a guaranteed seat on the firm's new advisory board. He was perfectly willing to sell his wife's family into total financial ruin if it meant he could escape the wreckage wealthy and unscathed. The internal collapse was beautiful in its brutal efficiency. The family was tearing each other apart behind closed doors, blinded by panic greed and deeply rooted resentments. Liam was actively digging the grave, preparing to bury Marcus alive to save his own skin. And Marcus, stripped of his power, his wealth, and his dignity, was finally realizing that he had absolutely no one left to save him. The walls were rapidly closing in, and his desperation was about to force him to do the one thing he swore he would never do. He was about to come crawling back to me. The security chime on my property gate rang precisely at 9 o'clock on Friday night. I was standing in my kitchen pouring a glass of sparkling water, watching the financial news networks cover the catastrophic implosion of Vanguard Aviation. I picked up my phone and opened the security camera feed. Standing at my front gate, leaning heavily against the intercom speaker, was Marcus. I took my time walking to the front door. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy wooden door open, stepping out onto the elevated threshold of my porch. If you were framing this shot for a film, you would place the camera directly behind my head, capturing an over-the-shoulder perspective that forced the audience to look down exactly as I was looking down. You would see me standing tall, perfectly composed, wrapped in a luxurious silk robe. Down below, standing at the bottom of my porch stairs, was the broken shell of a man who had tried to destroy me just 3 days prior. Marcus looked absolutely grotesque. The custom-tailored Italian suit he had worn like armor all week was completely ruined, the jacket wrinkled and stained with sweat. His expensive silk tie was missing. The top 3 buttons of his shirt were torn open, and his eyes were bloodshot and wild with panic. The unearned, arrogant swagger that usually carried him through the elite circles of Atlanta was entirely gone. He looked exactly like what he was, a terrified boy who had crashed his father's car and did not know how to pay for the damages. "Nia," he breathed out, his voice cracking violently. I did not invite him in. I did not step aside. I simply stood there, blocking the warm light of my home, offering him absolutely nothing but my cold, undivided attention. Marcus took a hesitant step up the stairs, his hands shaking as he reached out toward me. "I am sorry," he blurted out, the words tumbling over each other in a desperate, pathetic rush. "I messed up. I messed up worse than I have ever messed up in my entire life. The banks have frozen everything. The FAA is threatening me with criminal negligence. The pilots walked out this morning. I am losing the hangars, Nia. I am losing everything." I took a slow sip of my water. "Are you finished, Marcus? Because if you came here to give me a status report on the company you stole from me, my sources have already provided much more accurate financial data." He swallowed hard, shaking his head frantically. "No. No, that is not why I am here. I came here to make this right. I came here to hire you back." He looked up at me, his eyes wide and pleading, hoping I would somehow revert back to the loyal, hard-working executive who always cleaned up his family's messes. It was Chloe, he insisted, eagerly throwing the woman he claimed to love directly under the bus to save his own skin. She got into my head. She wanted the title, and she manipulated me. She does not know what she is doing. She chartered that flight today behind my back. She ruined us. I will fire her, Nia. I will fire her first thing tomorrow morning. I will make her pack her bags and march her out in front of the entire building exactly like I did to you. The sheer cowardice of his statement was staggering. "You are the chief executive officer, Marcus." I reminded him, my voice dangerously smooth. Chloe did not sign my termination papers. Chloe did not order security to escort me out of the boardroom. You gave her the authority to run those planes. You pulled the trigger. You do not get to blame the weapon when the bullet hits you in the foot. Marcus scrambled up another step, closing the distance, his desperation making him bold. "I will pay you whatever you want," he begged. "I will triple your previous salary. I will give you the corner office. Hell, I will give you a 10% equity stake in Vanguard. Just log into the federal portal. Make the calls. Fix the operational certificate and get my fleet back in the air. I know you can do it. You are the only one who knows how to navigate these federal regulators. Please, Naya. I looked at him, dissecting the absolute delusion required to make such an offer. You want to give me a 10% equity stake in a company facing $2 million in federal fines? A company with a completely frozen credit line, zero operational cash flow, and a mass exodus of its entire workforce. 10% of zero is zero, Marcus. And tripling my salary means absolutely nothing when your corporate accounts bounced payroll for your mechanics this morning. You cannot even afford to pay your electric bill, let alone my consulting fee. His face crumbled. He realized his money could no longer buy his way out of the consequences. So he pivoted, grabbing for the only weapon he had left. He tried to use his father's legacy, the ultimate guilt trip designed to manipulate my loyalty. You cannot let Vanguard fail, he pleaded, his voice dropping into a desperate whine. My father trusted you. He treated you like a daughter. Desmond spent his entire life building a monument to Black excellence in Atlanta. You cannot let a Black-owned business get swallowed up by the banks. The community needs this company. You owe it to my father to save his legacy. I felt a spike of pure, righteous anger ignite in my chest. I did not raise my voice, but the sudden lethal drop in my tone made Marcus physically flinch backward. Do not you dare invoke Black excellence while standing on my porch, I warned him. You do not care about the community. You do not care about building up Black professionals. You only care about the culture when you can use it as a shield to protect your own reckless incompetence. You were perfectly happy to publicly humiliate a Black woman who built your empire just to impress a social media influencer. You only remember your father's legacy when you need me to bail you out of federal prison. I took a step forward, forcing him to step back down the stairs. I paid my debt to your father years ago, Marcus. I paid it by keeping my mouth shut about his terrible credit history. I paid it by sacrificing my own sleep, my own relationships, and my own peace of mind to keep Vanguard from drowning. I gave your family a decade of my life. You destroyed it all in 30 minutes because your ego was too fragile to accept that a woman from the South Side was smarter than you. Marcus dropped to his knees right there on the concrete steps. The wealthy, untouchable heir was literally begging at my feet, his tears mixing with the sweat on his face. Nia, please, I am begging you. I have nothing left. Tell me what you want. Tell me what I have to do. I looked down at him. This was the moment he had tried to force upon me in the glass boardroom. This was the utter humiliation he wanted me to feel in front of the entire company. But I did not feel pity. I did not feel the sudden urge to play savior. I felt the profound, absolute clarity of a woman who had finally recognized her own limitless power. I don't want to work for you, Marcus, I said, delivering the words slowly so they would permanently brand themselves into his memory. I want to watch you drown. Shh. I stepped back inside my house and pulled the heavy wooden door shut. The lock clicked with a sharp, definitive snap echoing into the quiet night. I did not look out the window. I did not check the security cameras to see how long he stayed on his knees crying. I walked straight to my home office, sat down in front of my glowing monitors, and went back to work building my own empire. Marcus was a ghost of the past, and I was entirely focused on the future. If you were directing this specific transition, the camera would cut instantly from the dark, cold night of my front porch to the blinding, brilliant morning light of Midtown Atlanta. A handheld camera would be positioned just over my shoulder, tracking my every step as I walked through the double-glass doors of a sprawling, newly renovated commercial loft. There is no heavy, outdated mahogany furniture here. There are no cigar-scented curtains or relics of an old boys' club. The space is entirely composed of sleek glass partitions, polished concrete floors, and bright, unblemished white walls. This is the pristine, fully operational headquarters of Apex Aviation. I had not spent the last 2 months sitting idle in my home office, maliciously plotting revenge, just for the sake of being vindictive. Revenge is a terrible business model. It yields absolutely no return on investment. Instead, I had been methodically building an entirely new empire, brick by legal brick. When Marcus arrogantly terminated my contract and severed Vanguard's relationship with my holding company, he assumed my Federal Aviation Administration Part 135 operating certificate would simply collect dust. He fundamentally misunderstood how the aviation industry works. That certificate is the ultimate golden ticket. It takes years of rigorous federal audits, immaculate safety records, and millions of dollars in administrative compliance to secure. I already owned one outright, and it was entirely unburdened by Vanguard's toxic debt. All I had to do was file a formal doing business as registration with the state of Georgia. Overnight, my holding company officially became Apex Aviation. But a legal name and a federal certificate do not generate revenue on their own. I needed capital, and I needed high-profile clients to establish instant market dominance. Luckily, Marcus had spent the previous 72 hours aggressively alienating the wealthiest people in the southeastern United States. I did not need to apply for a traditional bank loan or beg venture capitalists for startup funding. I simply opened my personal contact list. The Black elite of Atlanta is a small, insular community, and loyalty is fiercely guarded. They had trusted Vanguard with their lives and their money for years, but they did not trust the Vanguard brand name. They trusted the woman who had personally ensured their safety, their discretion, and their absolute comfort for a decade. They trusted me. The very first phone call I made was to the prominent Georgia state senator who had demanded his $200,000 deposit back from Marcus. I dialed his personal cell phone number on a Sunday morning. I did not gossip about the federal raid, and I did not speak poorly of Desmond's son. I simply informed the senator that I had launched an independent management and charter brokerage firm. I guaranteed him that my new company possessed an active, unblemished federal operating certificate, and that his campaign travel schedule would not experience a single hour of interruption. He wired his entire deposit directly to the Apex Aviation corporate account before he even finished his morning coffee. My second call was to the management team of the Platinum Tier rapper who had been humiliated by the federal agents on the Vanguard tarmac. I offered a sincere professional apology for the catastrophic failure of my former employer. I promised them that the legal incompetence they witnessed was entirely isolated to Vanguard, and offered a complimentary, legally cleared charter flight to Miami to make up for their lost time. The rapper was so impressed by the sheer professionalism of the gesture that he signed a $1 million annual block-hour agreement with Apex Aviation the very next day. Within 1 week of my departure from Vanguard, I had systematically swept up every single major VIP contract Marcus had managed to lose. Professional athletes, corporate titans, and entertainment moguls eagerly transferred their massive deposits into my accounts. They wanted security, they wanted compliance, and they wanted competence. They knew I was the only person in the city who could deliver all three without a single excuse. As the camera follows me through the bustling open concept office, you can see the immediate results of that transferred wealth. The temporary dispatch center is already alive with quiet, focused energy. My newly hired logistics coordinators are monitoring glowing screens, filing flight plans, and managing routes with absolute precision. There is no panic here. There are no federal agents knocking on the glass doors, and there are certainly no Instagram influencers trying to override federal aviation laws for social media clout. I walk past the reception desk where the Apex Aviation logo is proudly mounted on the wall in sleek brushed silver lettering. I am wearing a sharp, impeccably tailored white power suit, projecting the exact kind of flawless authority that Marcus had tried so desperately to fake. I am not a hired hand, and I am certainly not a glorified secretary. I am the sole founder, the chief executive officer, and the absolute mastermind behind the fastest-growing luxury aviation firm in the country. While Marcus was begging on his knees on my front porch, completely paralyzed by the reality of his self-inflicted ruin, my accounting team was actively processing millions of dollars in newly secured revenue. I had stripped his father's company of its most valuable asset, the absolute trust of its elite clientele, and I had seamlessly transferred it into my own meticulously designed vault. But acquiring the clients was only the first phase of my overall strategy. To truly replace Vanguard as the undisputed king of the Atlanta skies, I needed the operational manpower to execute the flights safely. I needed the seasoned professionals who actually knew how to keep multi-million-dollar jets maintained and airborne. Marcus and his girlfriend had spent the last 2 months treating their employees like disposable garbage, and I was about to use their terrible management skills to finalize my total takeover of the industry. If you were editing this sequence for the screen, the pacing would instantly shift into a rapid, rhythmic montage. The camera would focus on the sharp, decisive scratch of a fountain pen across heavy watermarked bond paper. You would see close-up shots of firm, professional handshakes. You would see the genuine smiles of relief washing over the faces of veteran aviators as they stepped into my sunlit headquarters. I was not just building a company, I was assembling an army, and Marcus had practically gift-wrapped his best soldiers and delivered them directly to my front door. To understand how effortlessly I poached Vanguard's top talent, you have to understand the sheer depth of Chloe's financial ignorance. When Marcus handed her the title of Director of Operations, she took one look at the corporate ledger and panicked. She wanted to instantly rebrand the fleet interiors with imported Italian leather seats, custom embroidered cashmere blankets, and crystal champagne flutes to show off on her social media feeds. But because the company credit lines were already freezing under Marcus's mismanagement, she needed to free up liquid cash immediately. Her brilliant solution was to target the payroll. She sent out a mass corporate email entirely bypassing human resources, announcing a mandatory 20% pay cut for all flight crews and maintenance staff. She actually wrote that they should consider the pay cut an investment in the brand's new luxury aesthetic. She promised them that the exposure of flying her famous influencer friends would make up for the missing money in their bank accounts. You do not tell pilots who hold thousands of hours of specialized flight time that their mortgages need to suffer so you can buy custom throw pillows. And you absolutely do not disrespect the elite maintenance crew who literally hold the lives of your clients in their grease-stained hands. By the time my anonymous tip to the Federal Aviation Administration had grounded the fleet, the staff was already primed for a mass exodus. Captain Reynolds walking off the tarmac during the federal raid was just the spark that ignited the powder keg. I did not have to post a single job listing. Within 24 hours of Vanguard's payroll, bouncing my new receptionist at Apex Aviation was escorting Captain Reynolds into my pristine glass office. He did not come alone. He brought the 15 most requested, highly decorated pilots in the southeastern region. These were brilliant black men and women who had spent decades fighting through the ranks of a predominantly white, highly competitive industry. They demanded excellence, and they demanded respect. Marcus and Chloe had given them neither. I had their new employment contracts already drafted and waiting in neat, perfectly aligned stacks on my mahogany conference table. I did not just match their previous Vanguard salaries. I offered them a 10% increased comprehensive healthcare benefits starting on day one, and a guaranteed performance bonus structure funded by the massive VIP deposits I had secured that very morning. But more importantly, I looked them in the eye and promised them absolute operational integrity. I promised them a chief executive officer who actually knew the difference between a flight log and a cocktail napkin. I watched Captain Reynolds pick up the gold pen on the desk. He did not even read the fine print, because the trust between us had been forged over 10 years of flawless execution. He signed his name, passed the pen down the line, and within 20 minutes, the absolute best aviators in the city officially belonged to Apex. The pilots were secured, but a fleet cannot fly without the men and women on the ground. Later that same afternoon, the head of Vanguard's maintenance division walked into my office. Chief Hayes was a brilliant aerospace engineer, a man of few words who carried himself with quiet, undeniable authority. He walked in carrying a thick, heavy binder containing the flawless service records of his entire elite mechanical crew. Chloe had personally insulted him just days prior, snapping her fingers at him and demanding he work off the clock to polish the landing gear of a jet just so it would look better for her Instagram livestream. I stood up and shook his hand. I did not offer him empty corporate buzzwords. I handed Chief Hayes a contract that explicitly guaranteed his department full autonomy over all safety protocols and a massive, untouchable budget for premium diagnostic equipment. He read the first page, pulled his own pen from his breast pocket, and signed his name with a heavy, satisfying stroke. He then handed me a printed list of 22 master mechanics. He told me they were currently sitting in their cars in my parking lot, just waiting for his signal to walk through my doors. In a matter of 48 hours, the montage of signatures and handshakes was complete. I had surgically extracted the absolute best operational talent from Vanguard Aviation. I gave them security, dignity, and a clear vision for the future. Marcus was currently sitting in his dark, suffocating office across town, completely oblivious to the fact that his company was bleeding to death. Even if he somehow magically resolved his $2 million federal fine, even if the banks miraculously unfroze his corporate accounts, he had absolutely no one left to fly his planes. He had no one left to fix them. He owned an empty shell. Apex Aviation was now fully staffed, fully funded, and preparing for total airspace domination, while Liam was secretly plotting to sell Marcus's empty shell to the highest bidder. If you were to adjust the lighting for the next scene, you would strip away the bright, clean sunshine of my new headquarters. You would bathe the screen in sleazy, high-contrast shadows, the kind of harsh, underlit aesthetic you see in movies right before someone sells their soul to the devil. Liam was sitting in the corner booth of an exclusive, dimly lit bourbon bar in downtown Atlanta. He was swirling a $20 glass of amber liquid, grinning like a predator who had just cornered a wounded animal. Sitting across from him was a corporate proxy, a sharp-suited attorney representing a massive, highly secretive private equity fund known as Apex Holdings. Liam was actively selling out his brother-in-law. He did not care that Vanguard Aviation was a historic landmark of black wealth in the city. He only cared about his own extraction plan. He negotiated a multi-million-dollar golden parachute for himself, complete with total legal immunity from the impending federal fallout. In exchange, he promised to deliver Marcus's signature on a silver platter, effectively selling Vanguard to the equity firm. The next morning, Liam walked into Vanguard's completely deserted executive suite. The electricity had been restored only because Marcus had begged a personal friend for a short-term loan. Marcus was sitting on the floor of his office, his head in his hands, surrounded by final notice collection bills from enraged creditors. Liam did not offer a hand to help him up. He simply dropped a thick, leather-bound acquisition portfolio onto the center of the desk. "Get off the floor, Marcus." Liam ordered, his tone laced with absolute contempt, but masterfully disguised as tough love. "I just saved your life. I just saved this entire family from federal ruin." Marcus scrambled to his feet, hurriedly wiping his eyes. He stared at the portfolio like it was a glowing life raft in the middle of a freezing ocean. Liam leaned against the desk, effortlessly spinning the web of lies. "I leveraged every corporate contact I have in New York. I found a massive private equity fund called Apex Holdings. They specialize in acquiring distressed luxury assets. They do not care about the FAA fine or the temporary grounding. They want the Vanguard brand name, the elite client lists, and the premium hangar leases, and they are willing to acquire the corporate shell for $50 million. The number hit Marcus like a jolt of pure electricity. The sheer, intoxicating magnitude of $50 million completely erased the reality of his own catastrophic failures. He did not stop to ask why a massive equity fund would pay $50 million for a company with no pilots, no mechanics, and a suspended federal operating certificate. He did not question the highly suspicious timing of the offer. His ego, fragile and starving for validation, swallowed the bait whole. $50 million. Marcus whispered, a slow, triumphant smile spreading across his face. He smoothed down his wrinkled designer shirt, his posture instantly transforming back into the arrogant, untouchable CEO. "I knew it. I knew the brand I built was untouchable. They see the vision. I told you we just needed to hold out for the right investors." Liam masked his intense disgust behind a tight, predatory smile. "Exactly, Marcus. They see the vision, but the window is closing rapidly. We have to sign the letter of intent and the initial acquisition agreements immediately before the banks officially foreclose on the property tomorrow morning and freeze the remaining assets." Marcus did not read a single page of the dense legal documents. He did not ask to have outside independent counsel review the terms. He was too blinded by the mirage of a bailout and the desperation to prove me wrong. He grabbed his expensive fountain pen and eagerly signed his name on the dotted line, legally binding himself and the entire Vanguard corporate entity to the terms dictated by Apex Holdings. The ink was barely dry before Chloe burst into the office. Liam had texted her the dollar amount just moments prior. She ran in clutching a bottle of vintage champagne, completely ignoring the fact that the company credit cards were still entirely frozen. "We did it," Chloe screamed, throwing her arms around Marcus and jumping up and down. $50 million, baby. We are going to buy a mansion in Calabasas. We are going to show everyone in this city who runs the real luxury market. Marcus popped the champagne cork, the loud crack echoing off the empty glass walls of his dead company. He poured the expensive liquor into crystal glasses, celebrating a victory that absolutely did not exist. The sheer delusion was almost cinematic. Chloe, thoroughly addicted to the validation of strangers, immediately pulled out her phone. She hit the button to start an Instagram live broadcast, desperate to rewrite the narrative of her recent highly public humiliation on the tarmac. Within seconds, thousands of her followers tuned in. Chloe held her phone high, pressing her cheek against Marcus's shoulder, making sure the glittering Atlanta skyline was perfectly framed behind them. To all the haters who thought Vanguard was going under, she announced, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness and toxic vindication. And a very special shout-out to the bitter-fired employees who tried to sabotage us out of pure jealousy. We just closed a $50 million acquisition deal. Marcus is an absolute genius, and we are officially richer than ever. You cannot stop true bosses from winning. Next stop, private yachts and island hopping. Stay mad, losers. She took a large gulp of champagne, blowing a kiss to the camera before ending the stream. Across town, sitting at the polished mahogany desk in my fully operational, bustling new headquarters, I watched the live stream play out on my left monitor. I did not feel a single ounce of anger. I did not feel insulted by her petty high school taunts. I felt the deep, profound satisfaction of a master chess player watching their opponent eagerly step directly into an unavoidable checkmate. They were popping champagne and celebrating their massive payday. They had absolutely no idea that Liam had just handed them the financial equivalent of a live grenade. The trap was perfectly set, the documents were legally binding, and the final curtain was about to drop on the Vanguard empire. If you were to zoom in on the exact moment the trap was sprung, the camera would push past the champagne celebration and focus entirely on the heavy cream-colored paper resting on the desk. You would see extreme close-ups of the expensive gold fountain pen gliding across the dotted lines. You would hear the sharp, definitive scratch of ink, permanently altering the course of a man's life. But most importantly, you would see extreme close-ups of Liam's calculating, predatory eyes, watching Marcus sign away his entire existence. Liam had orchestrated the signing with the precision of a seasoned con artist. He knew exactly how to manipulate Marcus's fragile ego and overwhelming panic. When he dropped that portfolio on the desk, he deliberately placed his hand over the bottom half of the pages. He pointed only to the yellow, sticky flags, marking the signature lines, physically blocking the paragraphs that spelled certain doom. "We have 10 minutes before the banks officially open," Liam had urged, tapping his expensive watch and projecting a masterful illusion of urgency. "If we do not transmit these countersigned documents immediately, the foreclosure is automatic. Just sign the flags, Marcus. I have already reviewed every single clause. I am your general counsel. I am protecting you." That was the fatal lie. A corporate lawyer whose primary loyalty is to his own survival will never protect a sinking client. Marcus was so intoxicated by the phantom $50 million valuation and so desperate to prove he had beaten me that he did not bother to read a single paragraph of the fine print. He wanted to win so badly that he completely abandoned basic business sense. If he had stopped celebrating for just 5 minutes to actually read the contract, he would have discovered the devastating legal mechanisms Liam had hidden in the dense corporate jargon. The first lethal trap was the valuation itself. The $50 million purchase price was not a guaranteed cash payout, it was highly conditional. The contract explicitly stated that the valuation was entirely contingent upon Vanguard possessing an active, unencumbered Federal Aviation Administration, Part 135 operating certificate, and maintaining a debt-free balance sheet. Since Vanguard currently possessed neither, the $50 million figure instantly voided itself the second the ink dried. Apex Holdings was not buying a functioning aviation empire. They were acquiring a distressed non-operational shell. The second trap was Liam's golden parachute. Buried deep in the appendices was a separate executive advisory agreement. It legally decoupled Liam from Vanguard's impending bankruptcy and guaranteed him a highly lucrative consulting position with Apex Holdings. Liam had negotiated a massive financial kickback for delivering the company without any legal resistance. He had secured his own financial future by serving his brother-in-law on a silver platter. But the third trap was the absolute masterpiece of corporate destruction. It was a clause I had personally insisted upon when I secretly drafted those acquisition documents. When Marcus took over as chief executive officer, he co-mingled his personal finances with the corporate accounts to fund Chloe's lavish lifestyle and appease his own furious creditors. He assumed the limited liability structure of Vanguard would forever shield his personal bank accounts if the business failed. But the acquisition contract included a brutal indemnification waiver that officially pierced the corporate veil. By signing that specific page, Marcus legally agreed to attach all of his personal debts directly to the corporate entity. More devastatingly, he agreed that if the company failed to meet the conditions of the $50 million payout, his personal assets would serve as collateral to cover the outstanding corporate liabilities acquired by Apex Holdings. His luxury sports cars, his expansive penthouse, his remaining trust fund, and even his future earnings were now legally forfeit. He had signed away his absolute right to personal financial protection. Liam watched the final signature loop across the page with cold, unblinking eyes. He gently pulled the portfolio away from Marcus, snapping it shut with a heavy sound that resembled a coffin closing. He did not smile. He simply placed the documents into his leather briefcase and adjusted his designer tie. He had successfully orchestrated the greatest corporate heist in Atlanta's history, completely undetected by the arrogant heir sitting across from him. Liam walked out of the office while Chloe was still blowing kisses to her phone, leaving them to their manufactured celebration. Marcus had no idea that the document he just signed did not save him. It legally finalized his total financial execution. He had just handed the absolute undisputed ownership of his father's legacy, his own personal wealth, and his entire future over to a private equity firm that was entirely controlled by me. The champagne toast in his office was nothing more than the final pathetic gasp of a dying regime. The paperwork was signed, the traps were fully armed, and the ultimate confrontation was guaranteed. All that remained was for me to walk into the final board meeting and watch the brutal realization wash over their faces. If you were to position the camera for the climax of this story, you would mount it on an eye-level tracking rail right down the center of a massive 40-story high-glass boardroom in downtown Atlanta. The lighting is harsh and highly dramatic. The midday sun cuts sharp, blinding angles through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting deep, unforgiving shadows across the polished black marble floor. Marcus sits at the far end of the sprawling table. He has shed his panicked, disheveled look from my front porch. He is back in a custom charcoal suit, swirling a glass of sparkling water, looking out over the Atlanta skyline, like a conquering emperor who just miraculously won a brutal war. Chloe is beside him, scrolling furiously on her phone, actively shopping for luxury real estate in California. She is wearing an inappropriately loud designer dress, her diamond tennis necklace catching the harsh sunlight. Liam sits a few seats away, but he is completely silent. He does not share their manic celebratory energy. He is simply watching the heavy oak double doors at the front of the room, his hands folded neatly over his leather briefcase. He is waiting for the new owner of his loyalty to arrive. The heavy brass handles turn. The massive doors swing open with a slow, deliberate weight. I step into the boardroom. The dramatic lighting hits me instantly, casting exactly half of my face in deep, impenetrable shadow, while the other half is brilliantly illuminated. I am wearing a flawless, impeccably tailored optic white power suit. It is the ultimate visual contrast to the dark, shady backroom deals they have been conducting. I do not look like a hired hand. I look like the absolute owner of the building. Marcus frowns, his smug expression melting into sheer, irritated confusion. He looks past my shoulder, expecting corporate security to be chasing me down the hall. "What are you doing here, Nia?" he demands, his voice dripping with instant hostility. "This is a highly confidential executive acquisition meeting. Security should not have even let you pass the lobby desk." Chloe rolls her eyes, slamming her phone face down on the marble table. "Are you seriously stalking us now?" She sighs loudly, crossing her arms. Marcus, call the front desk and have her removed. She is probably just here to beg for her severance package back. I do not answer them immediately. I walk with slow, deliberate, unbothered steps straight toward the head of the table. I bypass Marcus completely. I pull out the oversized, high-backed leather chair reserved for the presiding executive. It is the very seat Marcus thought he was about to sell to a mysterious billionaire savior. I sit down, place a sleek black portfolio on the marble surface, and fold my hands over it. I look directly at Marcus, my voice echoing off the cold glass walls with terrifying surgical clarity. "I am not here for a severance package, Marcus, and nobody bypassed security. I own this floor. In fact, my company holds the master lease for this entire commercial suite. I am here because you requested a final in-person meeting with the Chief Executive Officer of Apex Holdings to finalize the transfer of your remaining corporate assets." Marcus stares at me, his brain completely misfiring. He blinks rapidly, looking from me to Liam and back to me. The words are entering his ears, but his fragile ego violently refuses to process the information. He forces a bitter, condescending laugh, leaning back in his chair. "You," he scoffs, shaking his head. "You are Apex Holdings. Stop playing games, Nia. Apex is a massive private equity fund out of New York. Liam personally verified their corporate credentials and negotiated the buyout." I shift my gaze to Liam. Liam does not flinch. He slowly opens his briefcase, pulls out the final acquisition documents Marcus eagerly signed yesterday, and slides them precisely across the long table until they stop directly in front of me. Liam clears his throat and looks Marcus dead in the eye. "She is not playing games, Marcus." Liam states, his voice completely devoid of any familial warmth or respect. "Nia is the sole founder and managing director of the Apex Equity Group. She is the buyer." The oxygen violently leaves the room. You can actually see the blood drain from Marcus's face, leaving him a sickening ashy gray. His jaw drops, but no sound comes out. Chloe stops breathing, her manicured hands gripping the edge of the marble table so tightly her knuckles turn white. The devastating reality of the trap is finally settling over them like a suffocating blanket. I lean forward, letting the harsh sunlight illuminate my face completely. "I told you I did not want to work for you, Marcus. I told you I wanted to watch you drown. But I never said I would not buy the wreckage after you sank the ship. You spent the last week desperately trying to find a lifeline because your arrogance blinded you to the fact that you were completely surrounded by predators. You wanted a billionaire savior to fly in and rescue your father's legacy from the federal government. But all you found was the exact same black woman from the South Side you tried to humiliate and destroy at a country club gala. If you were operating the camera in this exact moment, you would execute a slow, agonizingly deliberate dolly shot, pushing directly into my face. You would blur out the opulent boardroom behind me, blurring out the panic and the heavy, expensive mahogany, leaving absolutely nothing in the frame except the cold, undisputed truth I was about to unleash. Marcus started shaking his head. His breathing became erratic, his chest heaving under his designer shirt. He slammed his hand flat against the table, a pathetic, noisy attempt to reclaim control of a room he had already lost. "That is impossible," he stammered, his voice pitching up into a frantic, reedy register. "I read the cover sheet. I signed the paperwork. The contract clearly states a $50 million acquisition. 50 million, Nia. You are legally obligated to transfer those funds into my holding account by the close of business today. You cannot just change the numbers because you are bitter. Liam verified the entire deal. I kept my hands perfectly still on top of the black portfolio. I did not raise my voice. The truth does not need to shout. You did not read the contract, Marcus. I stated, my tone sharp and clinical. You read the bold print on the cover sheet. You saw a giant number with a lot of zeros, and you let your massive starving ego do the rest of the thinking. If you had bothered to read Section 12, Paragraph 4, you would have seen the valuation contingency clause. I opened the portfolio and slid a highlighted copy of his signed contract across the polished marble surface. It stopped exactly an inch from his trembling fingertips. The agreement you eagerly signed yesterday morning dictates that the $50 million valuation is strictly contingent upon Vanguard Aviation possessing an active, unencumbered Federal Aviation Administration Part 135 operating certificate and maintaining a completely debt-free balance sheet. I watched his eyes dart down to the highlighted text, the horror finally sinking into his bones. You have neither of those things, Marcus. You have a totally paralyzed fleet. You have a $2 million federal penalty. You have bounced payroll, furious vendors, and heavily defaulted hangar leases. I leaned forward, closing the physical distance between us, lowering my voice to a terrifying, absolute calm. Therefore, the financial multiplier automatically triggered in your buyout clause is exactly 0. You are not getting $50 million. You are not getting $50. You are walking out of this building with absolutely nothing. Chloe let out a sharp, genuine gasp, pressing both hands over her mouth. The glamorous illusion of her Calabasas mansion and her private yachts violently shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces. But I was not finished. The financial execution required complete and total transparency. You loved bragging about your high-profile network, Marcus. I continued, holding his panicked gaze. You thought you could destroy my reputation by whispering lies to the black elite of Atlanta at your exclusive country club galas. But you forgot one crucial detail. Rich people do not care about your country club gossip. They care about their money, their time, and their safety. When you failed them, they did not just leave Vanguard. They called me. I watched his jaw drop as the full scope of my strategy finally materialized in front of him. Apex Holdings is not a faceless group of Wall Street bankers, I revealed, allowing a sharp, victorious smile to finally break across my face. Apex Holdings is a private equity fund capitalized entirely by your former VIP clients. The state senator you tried to overcharge, the professional athletes whose playoff travel you ruined. Do you remember the platinum tier rapper that Chloe nearly got arrested on the tarmac last week? The one who demanded his $70,000 deposit back. He is my lead capital investor. He personally funded 30% of this acquisition just to guarantee he never has to deal with your profound incompetence ever again. Marcus gripped the edge of the table, looking physically ill. The veins in his neck were pulsing visibly. He looked to Liam for some kind of legal objection, a loophole, a desperate lifeline. Liam simply looked away, adjusting his cuffs completely detached from the slaughter. "You cannot just take my planes!" Marcus choked out a final pathetic attempt at defiance. "My father owns those jets. They are registered to our family. You cannot just steal a multi-million-dollar fleet with a trick contract." "I am not stealing anything, Marcus. And I am certainly not buying your toxic, irradiated company." I sat back in the heavy leather chair, crossing my legs. "I simply let you sign the liability waivers so your corporate veil could be legally pierced. Once you attached your personal assets to Vanguard's toxic debt, your primary lending bank officially declared your loans in catastrophic default. At 8 o'clock this morning, the creditors legally repossessed every single Gulfstream and Bombardier on your tarmac." I tapped the black portfolio on the desk. "Vanguard Aviation is entirely worthless. It is an empty dead shell. I did not buy Vanguard from you. I went directly to the bank. Apex Holdings purchased your entire repossessed fleet in a private closed-door foreclosure auction. The bank was so desperate to get your toxic, non-operational assets off their books that they accepted my initial cash offer without a single counterbid. I let the silence stretch out, ensuring the final number would echo in his ears for the rest of his life. I legally acquired your entire aviation empire for a mere $2 million, I stated, paid in full in liquid cash, funded by the very clients you insulted. You handed me the keys to a $50 million kingdom for the absolute rock-bottom price of your own stupidity. If you were sitting in the editor's bay cutting this exact sequence, you would throw away the slow, methodical tracking shots. You would rely entirely on rapid razor-sharp cuts to capture the sheer frantic collapse of Marcus's reality. Cut to Marcus, his chest heaving, sweat dripping down his collar. Cut to Chloe staring at her diamond tennis necklace, as if it had suddenly turned into a heavy, suffocating chain of debt. Cut to Liam, whose face remained a mask of absolute chilling indifference. The silence in the room was no longer a display of power. It was the frantic, breathless vacuum of a sinking ship right before the freezing water rushes in. Marcus turned his wild, bloodshot eyes toward the middle of the table. He looked at Liam, the man he genuinely believed was his ultimate legal shield. Marcus pointed a shaking finger at me. "Liam, do something!" Marcus demanded, his voice cracking into a desperate, high-pitched shout. "She is lying. She has to be lying. You reviewed the contracts. You said the corporate veil would protect my personal assets. File an injunction. Call the federal authorities. Have her arrested for corporate espionage. Do your job and fix this right now." Liam did not reach for his legal pad. He did not pull out his phone to call a judge. He simply reached out and clicked his leather briefcase shut. The metallic snap echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. Liam stood up, smoothing the front of his tailored suit. He did not look at Marcus with pity or regret. He looked at him with the cold, calculated detachment of a man observing a stain on the pavement. Then Liam did the absolute unthinkable. He walked away from Marcus's end of the table. His expensive leather shoes clicked sharply against the marble floor as he crossed the vast sunlit expanse of the boardroom. He did not stop until he reached the head of the table. He turned around and stood perfectly still, positioning himself directly behind my right shoulder. He had physically and legally crossed enemy lines. Marcus stared at his brother-in-law, his jaw unhinged, his mind completely unable to process the visual. "What are you doing?" Marcus choked out, standing up and gripping the edge of the table to keep his balance. "Get away from her. You are the General Counsel of Vanguard. You are my family." Liam adjusted his cuffs, his expression entirely devoid of warmth. "I was the General Counsel of Vanguard, Marcus." He corrected, his voice smooth and utterly ruthless. "But Vanguard is a dead entity. And as for family, I am married to your sister, which means my primary obligation is to protect her financial future from your catastrophic incompetence." I leaned back in the executive chair, allowing a slow, satisfied smile to cross my face. I watched the absolute horror wash over Marcus as the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. "You sold me out!" Marcus whispered, the realization hitting him so hard he physically staggered backward. "You set up the entire acquisition. You knew she was behind Apex Holdings. You drafted the indemnification clauses that tied my personal accounts to the corporate debt. You handed her the knife and told me it was a life preserver." Liam did not even blink. "I did not sell you out, Marcus. You sold yourself out the minute you fired the only woman who knew how to fly your planes. I simply managed the liquidation of your stupidity. Nia offered me a permanent, highly compensated seat on the executive board of Apex Aviation, along with a massive consulting fee to facilitate the seamless transfer of your repossessed assets. I chose to align myself with a competent chief executive officer instead of a spoiled heir playing dress-up. The betrayal was absolute." Marcus let out a guttural, furious sound and lunged forward, but he stopped short, realizing he had absolutely no power, no authority, and no leverage to enforce a single threat. He was a completely broken man, standing in a room he no longer owned. But the humiliation was far from over. The rapid camera cuts would now snap directly to Chloe. Her manicured hands were shaking violently as she frantically processed the financial bloodbath. Chloe was not a business strategist, but she understood the brutal mathematics of wealth preservation. She heard the words "personal assets seized," and she knew exactly what that meant for her. There would be no Calabasas mansion, There would be no private yachts, no designer shopping sprees, and no corporate credit cards. Marcus was not just unemployed. He was personally liable for millions of dollars in federal fines and defaulted loans. He was a walking financial black hole. Chloe's survival instinct kicked in with terrifying speed. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the marble floor. Chloe Marcus pleaded, reaching a hand out toward her, desperate for at least one person to remain on his side. Tell them they are insane. We can fight this. I still have my trust fund. We can hire outside lawyers. Chloe looked at his outstretched hand as if it were covered in toxic waste. She took a giant step backward, physically recoiling from him. Are you out of your mind, Marcus? Chloe shouted, her voice shrill and dripping with absolute disgust. Your trust fund is gone. She just said the bank seized your personal assets. You are broke. You owe the federal government $2 million. You dragged me into this mess, promised me I would be running a luxury empire, and now I'm going to have lawsuits attached to my name because of your fake contracts. Marcus looked like he had been slapped across the face. Babe, please, he begged, his voice dropping into a pathetic whimper. I did this for us. I fired her for you. Chloe let out a harsh, bitter laugh that completely stripped away her sweet influencer persona. You fired her because you have a fragile ego, Marcus. I am an influencer. My entire brand is built on luxury and success. I cannot be associated with a broke, disgraced, unemployed fraud facing federal charges. I do not do broke. With a swift, dramatic motion, Chloe reached for her left hand. She grabbed the massive 5-carat diamond ring Marcus had purchased just weeks prior, using Vanguard's rapidly draining corporate funds. She yanked it off her finger. Keep your cheap, repossessed jewelry, she spat. She threw the diamond ring directly at him. The heavy stone struck Marcus squarely in the chest before bouncing off the mahogany table and clattering onto the marble floor. It spun in a tight metallic circle before coming to a complete stop near his expensive leather shoes. Chloe did not wait to see him cry. She grabbed her designer handbag, turned on her stiletto heels, and stormed out of the glass boardroom. The heavy doors slammed shut behind her, the sound echoing through the cavernous space. She was already pulling out her phone, undoubtedly scrolling through her contacts, to find an executive in the lobby who still had an active credit limit. The rapid cuts ceased. The room fell entirely still. Marcus was left standing completely alone at the far end of the long table. He had no lawyer, he had no girlfriend, he had no company, no fleet, and no fortune. He was a king standing in the ruins of a castle he had burned down with his own 2 hands. And the final, most devastating consequence was still waiting just outside the heavy oak doors. If you were directing the final frame of this story, you would lock the camera completely down. You would strip away all the frantic movement, all the rapid cuts, and leave a perfectly steady, unblinking lens. You would let the suffocating silence of that massive glass boardroom breathe for a long, agonizing moment. Marcus was staring at the discarded diamond ring resting near his expensive leather shoes. He had absolutely nothing left to say. But the final reckoning was not going to come from me. The heavy brass handles of the oak doors turned one last time. The doors swung open slowly, revealing the sterile squeak of rubber wheels against the polished marble floor. A private medical attendant pushed a specialized wheelchair into the center of the room. Sitting in that chair was Desmond, the founder, the titan of Atlanta Aviation, the father who had built an empire from scratch only to watch his son reduce it to ashes in a matter of weeks. Desmond looked older, visibly diminished by the massive stroke that had nearly killed him. The left side of his face drooped slightly, and a thick plaid blanket was draped over his lap. But his dark eyes were razor-sharp, and they were burning with a level of absolute, unadulterated fury that could melt steel. He had awakened from his coma days ago. Liam had personally briefed him on every single catastrophic mistake his son had made. Desmond had reviewed the federal fines, the bounced payroll, and the final acquisition papers from his hospital bed. Marcus scrambled to his feet. A sick, desperate wave of relief washed over his face. He actually believed his father was there to save him. He rushed across the boardroom, falling to his knees beside the wheelchair, grabbing the armrests like a drowning man clutching a piece of driftwood. "Dad, thank God you are awake," Marcus cried, his voice thick with panic. Nia and Liam orchestrated a hostile takeover. They conspired against me. They manipulated the Federal Registry and forced the banks to seize the fleet. "You have to call the board. You have to fix this." Desmond did not reach out to comfort his son. He looked down at the weeping 34-year-old man kneeling on the marble floor with profound, inescapable disgust. Desmond raised his right functioning hand, silencing the pathetic stream of excuses with a single trembling gesture. "You did not need a conspiracy to fail, Marcus," Desmond rasped. His voice was gravelly and strained from the stroke, but the authority behind it was absolute. "You did it entirely on your own. I spent 30 years fighting every systemic barrier in this country to build a monument to Black wealth. I gave you the best education, the best connections, and a flawless operating machine. And you handed it to a social media model because you felt threatened by the very woman I hired to keep you from ruining us." Marcus opened his mouth to protest, but Desmond cut him off. "You are a disgrace to my name. You signed a document assigning your personal debts to my company without reading the terms. You broke the trust of my oldest clients. You are not a victim, Marcus. You are a fool. And as of this morning, my personal attorneys have executed a complete revision of my estate. I have stripped you of your remaining trust funds. You are officially disinherited. You will not see another dime of my money." Marcus collapsed back onto his heels, the final string of his safety net completely severed. He buried his face in his hands, openly sobbing on the floor of the room he thought he ruled just an hour ago. Desmond slowly lifted his gaze from his ruined son and looked down the length of the long mahogany table. He looked at Liam, acknowledging the ruthless betrayal with a slight nod of understanding between ruthless businessmen. Then his eyes locked onto me. I sat perfectly still in the oversized executive chair, my white suit catching the bright midday sun. "Nia," Desmond said, his voice softening just a fraction, "you played a brilliant game. You built an ironclad strategy and you executed it without mercy. I cannot fault you for taking advantage of his sheer incompetence. You won fair and square." Desmond paused, taking a labored breath. "But I am asking you, as the man who gave you your first major opportunity in this industry, for a single concession. He is broke. He has federal fines attached to his social security number. He will lose his home by Tuesday. Give him a job, Nia. A baggage handler, a janitor in the maintenance bay, a junior flight tracker on the graveyard shift. Give him the lowest level position in your new empire just out of pity so my son does not starve on the streets of Atlanta." I looked at the old man sitting in his wheelchair, pleading for the pride of a son who had squandered everything. I slowly reached out and picked up the crystal champagne flute that Chloe had left abandoned on the table. It was still filled with premium vintage champagne. I stood up from the executive chair. I did not look at Marcus weeping on the floor. I did not look at Liam standing silently behind me. I looked directly into the camera lens, breaking the fourth wall with the absolute chilling certainty of a woman who now owned the entire sky. I raised the glass of champagne, offering a slow, deliberate toast to the ruined founder. "I told you, Desmond. You take the risk, you pay the price. Vanguard doesn't exist anymore. Welcome to Apex."